Okay, and welcome everybody. We are back in a new unit. We are starting with unit 2 of biological basis of behavior, and that's our entire unit. And it is going to be, I'm going to try to divide it into different little sections so they're smaller videos, and they're pretty like just straight to the point. So what I need you guys to do is you're gonna write at the top of your notes your central nervous system. You should have glued in the cover sheet, which is basically the key concepts for this entire unit. And the first set of notes is going to be central nervous system notes number one. And first thing you're gonna write is basically this, which is the organization of the nervous system and how do we organize our entire nervous system. And first one I want you guys to write down is neural anatomy. Now, let me backtrack real quick. For this set of notes, you do not need to write the make that line and divide it. You just need to leave the space in between, like the red line and the blue line, and just write your notes in between those two lines. So then those could be our margins to add notes if we need to. But this one is not going to need a lot of real class notes for this. Okay. So neuroanatomy is basically the study of the structure of the nervous system, which it basically includes the brain and then the nerves. And then the brain obviously is here in the skull, and then the nerves are basically throughout your entire body, and it's um, what receives the information from our senses and our brain to kind of to the rest of our body. Okay? And then you're going to skip a line and we're going to go into the central nervous system. Now, I did write a little bit more for here, but you'll see as it starts dwindling, and I need you to add information. So this is not just copy it and that's it, and then tune me out. No, no, no. All right. So we'll start with the first one, which is our central nervous system or nervous system. And this is basically what this is kind of like the whole entire brains of the operation because your brain is also included in the central nervous system. So, this central nervous system is what coordinates our actions, and then it interacts with other systems in our body to tell it what to do, right? Or how to respond. And the main guy is going to be the brains, right? So the main part, kind of the operator of the whole thing, is the brains. And then you're going to have your spinal cord, which is basically what you could write here is like the avenue to the brain that it communicates with, right? With basically the rest of the body. So it's kind of like and if you look at nerves, it literally looks like kind of streets and roads, but it's like that. It's like road map to the different parts of the body that needs to respond. Um, the brain is the dominator here, and the spinal cord is kind of like the second. The brain is the king, I guess. Well, I wouldn't even want to say that. Let's not forget that. And again, I've been teaching all day, and it's a little bit later, and so my examples are running out of them. And I'll stop talking because if not, you guys are like, oh, these videos are taking super long. Okay, whatever. I'm trying here. Now, central nervous system, I need you to add this in there, is that 99% of all of your nerve cells are part of the central nervous system. So this is a really big deal. And you'll hear a lot of now, especially that people are focusing on your nervous system, your central nervous system, and the different parts, and you'll see why, right? So it's divided. So your nervous system, and you are definitely going to need to write this diagram. You're going to see this diagram a bunch of times. And as you guys are writing this, I want you to draw this, but I also want you to write like notes either on the side and maybe a different color pen. You can also just maybe on the side. It's up to you because these are your notes. So whatever works for you. For me, my personal notes, I kind of have like a little combination of main notes on the side, and then little key points for here. So it's really up to you. So nervous system is divided into two parts, right? You have your central nervous system, which is kind of what I talked about here, and then you have your peripheral. So we'll start a little bit with the central nervous system, which is basically the one that's going to, and sorry. Central nervous system is going to be here and checking my notes. Okay, but spinal cord. So spinal cord is part of it. And this is the one, the nerves that connects basically the brain and the rest of your nervous system. So the spinal cord connects from the brain to the rest of your central nervous system. Then you have the brainstem, right? And brainstem is the one that receives information from the spinal cord and also sends it out, right, from the brain. I'm sorry. Yeah, gets it from the brain, and then the brainstem sends it through the spinal cord to the other parts of the nervous system. And then the brain is the one basically that is interpreting the electrical impulses and giving it meaning. Um, so there's that. Now, I do want you to note that also the spinal cord also will receive information from your senses and send it to the brain. And then the brain also sends those signals back through the spinal cord. Okay? So that's the main guy. Then if we look over here, we're going to have what's called the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is basically the part of our nervous system that links to the outside world, right, through our senses, and kind of tells us how we need to respond to whatever these signals are from the outside world. Now, under this one, we have what's called the autonomic and the somatic. Okay, now I'm going to actually start at the somatic one. And the somatic is basically anything that has to do with voluntary control, such as your muscles. Okay, so somatic is when your nerves are basically saying, like, okay, you got to start walking or you got to run. The somatic is what gets activated. So this is all voluntary, and it can decipher pain, temperature. Okay, so make sure to include that, as well as your motor nerves, right? Like when you need to raise your hand in class, that's your somatic um, nervous system activating. Okay, now the main one, the main guy, a lot of times we talk about, is going to be the autonomic. And if you notice, the word is auto is in there. So I always think of something that is automatic. Okay. And that's actually very, very important because this is the one that it controls the I'm sorry, it controls involuntary bodily processes. So anything that is involuntary, such as, and make sure to have this in there, is breathing, heart rate, digestion, as well as like the dilating of pupils. And you'll kind of see here what these are the parts of the body that are automatic, right? We don't have, it's not like we're like, okay, it's time to, speed up that heart rate, right? It'll automatically do that, or digestion as well. So these are involuntary, the autonomic. Now, in under the autonomic, um, it is divided into two. You have your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic. And I will definitely leave space on the bottom. Kind of ignore this drawing for now. That's just for me, for you guys, since there's no PowerPoint. But you definitely need to be putting notes right under each one of these because of for sure they're always asking about this. They may say like peripheral nervous system, and you need to know that that includes the autonomic and somatic, and then you have your sympathetic and parasympathetic, for your autonomic, right? The automatic, involuntary. So I'm going to go into what the first one is. So sympathetic nervous system is basically your emergency response system. Okay, so make sure to include that in there. It's your emergency response system, which next to the bullet is your fight or flight. Okay, response. So this is when we feel like there's any type of stressors or that we are in danger, whatever it is that activates that fight or flight, this system automatically gets activated. And this is the one that everyone basically has, right? Evolutionary wise, we all have this. And it's quite interesting because you definitely need to know what happens to our nervous system when we are in sympathetic. So, for instance, when you guys had to take the test, the Unit 5 test, you definitely, some of you were in that sympathetic nervous system was activated because you guys were nervous or really anxious, and then our bodies don't know, our brains don't know the difference if it's just a test or we're like in actual danger. Um, so it activates the sympathetic. But you need to know a couple things of what ends up happening when we are in the sympathetic. And it's great, like how our body knows how to do this. What's not good is that when we spend too much time in the sympathetic and where we can start having a lot more problems, right? So just think of the best way I could always remember the sympathetic. This is an evolutionary thing. It gets our bodies ready to fight or run, right? So it's that fight or flight. It's literally getting you ready. So you'll have, and a couple things. There's a bunch of stuff here, but you're not gonna need to, or not gonna remember every single one. I'll just kind of highlight the main ones. But for sure, the dilating of your pupils, right? Dilating of pupils, and that is in order, and it's very cool why it happens, but it's because in order for like survival, you need more light to come in, so you can see your surroundings, okay? Another one that happens is that your stomach digestion starts, it inhibits it, right? So it slows it down. You don't get hungry. You even are not even as thirsty anymore. Also, your heart rate, right, your heartbeat starts increasing, so the blood flow will go to your muscles in order to run or fight. Also, your lungs also relax in order to try to get as much oxygen in order to fight. Okay. Um, it also will stimulate your glucose levels of sugar. I mean, I'm sorry, not sugar, but your liver, right? So it's going to increase your glucose. Might want to include that in there. And of course, because glucose is sugar, that's going to help you with your energy. All right. It is also going to secrete hormones, and these hormones are, we call it norepinephrine or adrenaline. There are two different. One is norepinephrine is also a neurotransmitter, and then adrenaline is your hormone. They're all chemicals basically. And these chemicals are going to help you get activated. And so those are really the main ones that you need to know, that there's hormones and chemicals being released, your glucose level increases, your digestion slows down, heart rate increases, your lungs start expanding so that you can get in air. So this just basically, it's great in order if we want to survive. However, this is not a good thing when if we're constantly here, because this is where you start getting problems with your lungs. You start getting problems more specifically with your heart, with your glucose levels, right? Stomach digestion becomes a problem, right? This is when people get really anxious. There's always having some type of stomach issue. Okay, now once we do that, right, our body's kind of like, all right, once we already did all that, our body has an automatic response that is called the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic, and I always think of the word in Spanish like para, which is to stop. And it's kind of your body's way of saying, all right, we did that fight or flight, but now we gotta chill. Okay. The problem is, so the parasympathetic is to calm the body. And then it does that by kind of doing the opposite of what happened in the sympathetic. It moves on so that your body can chill out. Okay, so some of the things that it does, it's going to reduce your energy. This is why your digestion kicks in and you need, you get really, really hungry. And I'll put this here, like the stimulating the gallbladder and your stomach as well as your heartbeat starts going down. Um, and your pupils, that one's not as important, but the saliva, right? The salivation gets stimulated, which allows you to get hungry. That's why you start getting hungry. This happens a lot when, if you notice when you are like really, really stressed, and then you either like knock out, right? You're like, okay, I need to rest, and then you get really hungry. And that's because you've used up all of this energy here and your body needs it back. Okay. Now, with that being said, obviously, being in both of these are not a good thing, especially this one. So when we are constantly stressed out, and this is why it's not good to always be stressed out, is where we'll start having health issues. Okay, and we don't want those things. All right, and I think that's pretty much it for this section. Just kidding. One more. We're almost there. Okay, so skip that, like skip a line, and then we'll start with pathways in the nervous system. And it's kind of like how the nervous system works. So for here, it actually starts in, excuse me, in our senses. So starts in our senses, those neurons, right, or those nerves send the message to the brain. The brain interprets those signals in its own neurons, and then it gives it meaning, and then it sends it back, right, to the rest of the body to tell it what to do. So like I've said many, many times, our senses is what tells our brain what is going on in the world. Okay? Now, with that being said, I want you guys to write down here the different types of nerves. Okay? Nerves, or you'll also see it called a neuron. They're in for this class, they're in the same. Now, before you start and writing the first type of of nerve, I want you to write that there are about 100 billion neurons or nerves in our system, which is pretty freaking amazing. And when we get into development in that unit, I love it because it's so interesting how quickly from two little cells when they come together, right? Like the sperm and the egg come together, they literally will mutate so quickly that in a matter of 2 weeks, you have hundreds of these neurons and cells, right? Which is really, really cool. All right, so let's go into the different kinds of nerves we have in our body. And I will tell you, this is one that they are constantly adding in there. So make sure you know it. And there's different ways of different names of them, and you're gonna need to know both. So the first one is going to be afferent neurons, okay, or nerves. And these are basically your sensory, like your sensors, your senses have afferent. And so writing this down is that this one is the one that carries messages from your body's tissues and sensory receptors to the brain, basically through the spinal cord. Okay, so it's basically the senses, it receives information from our senses, and this is the one that sends it to the brain. Okay, like through the spinal cord and through the brain. All right, so the sensory receptors, I want you to add in there, sensory receptors are, which are the ones that take in information, which are your senses. It's going to be your skin, your eyes, your ears, your nose, and your mouth. Okay? Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And for this one, we have millions of afferents. And they lie all here. Now, this, and I just want you to add in there, this is the one, the type of nerves that are going to be in charge of what's called transduction. And you'll learn a little bit more when we go into sensation and perception, but I want to drop a little seed in there. And transduction is basically to get, it's where they transform the signals from outside to an electrical impulse, so that they can send it to the brain, because the brain communicates with electrical impulse, so it has to transform it into an electrical impulse, and that happens in our senses. Really cool. You need to know where when we get there. All right. Next one is going to be efferent nerves and or neurons, and these are basically your motor. These are the motor neurons, and this is where it carries information from the brain to the muscles. Okay, so to the muscles and the glands and organs. So I hope you wrote that all down. Um, so afferent gets it from the senses to the brain. Efferent nerve sends it from the brain to your muscles, basically, in order to respond to whatever the afferent said. Then we have what's called the interneurons. Interneurons are basically the neurons that they're like the relay guys. They're not really afferent or efferent. They're just the ones that kind of help both these nerves connect to one another. They tend to be a lot longer sometimes, and you'll see there's different types of um, nerves and neurons in our body. Okay, and they will be different sizes. Some are longer, some are shorter. So it just kind of depends what those neurons, like what their function is. So it's quite interesting. All right. So a little side note that I want you to write here. It's not here, but I want you to write what's called mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons, it's fascinating, this new research that they have going on. And this is basically where imitation, it plays a role in imitation, and it is activated when we sorry, when we perform a task or hold on a second. Maybe I should let's pause. Okay, so mirror neurons are basically, they're activated. So these neurons, and they're just like all over, what they've noticed is that when we're watching other people perform or doing something, our neurons will do the same, will be activated like if we were doing that. Okay, and this is where we get that neuroplasticity. This is where we get observational learning. So mirror neuron, for instance, if I'm watching a video, so here's an example. If I'm watching, actually, let's do this. If you're in dance and you're watching somebody dance and you're trying to learn the choreography and you're like visualizing it, what's happening in your brain, it's actually all the neurons that if you were actually dancing physically are also activated. So you don't even have to be really dancing. You could just be thinking and watching somebody do it, and your neurons will activate like if it was actually doing that. Okay, now here's the only thing with mirror neurons and doing that is that you need to have some type of experience. Like, so for instance, when my friends and we watch like mountain bike videos, I know it sounds really silly, and since we all mountain bike, when we're watching it, like we literally could feel like if we're actually doing that, and you'll see us all like moving with the video, right? And in actuality, what's really happening is that your neurons are activated like if you were actually doing that activity. So what they've said in some research is they've been talking about now is that if you want to learn or master something, all you have to do is like even watching a video and pretending that you're doing it, that you will be making those like the connections within those neurons, like that long-term potentiation. You don't actually have to physically do it. All I have to do is keep on watching a video and my neurons are connecting like if it was actually happening. However, key to that is that you have to have already some of those neural connections already, right? So like for me, since I have the connections with mountain biking, it will get stronger. But if like one of you guys that have never mountain bike and watch that video, you'll just be like, okay, this is there. Like no mirror neurons will really be happening. Okay, so you have to have some connections already there. All right, and then I want you to add in there the glial cells. And the glial cells are just basically cells or glia cells that are there to support and nourish the neurons. Okay, so they're the protectors. Quite important. All right, and that's basically it. But I do have a way, before I forget, for you to remember the different afferent and efferent neurons. Okay, so if you write the word same on the end, they sound very similar. They sound the same, and same is sensory, which is afferent, right? And then motor is going to be efferent. Okay, so this is just a good way, a mnemonic device to remember. And obviously I didn't finish writing that, but you guys could do that. All right, guys, we're done. Bye, see you later.